The Football Night in America podcast. We're back. Devin, McCourty alongside Jason Garrett. You guys know you usually find us on Football Night in America before the big Sunday night showdown. But now, why not get on here in the offseason and talk about free agency? It's always so much excitement. Super Bowl ends. It's like, who will my favorite team pick up? What will they do? And we saw a lot of action opening free agency, and it was fun because yesterday, our producer, Matt Casey, texts both me and Jason. Is like, hey, what's the number one thing that you see or that you feel passionate about coming out of free agency? And right away, JG, you said the Bears. The Bears, they beef it up. They get bigger on both sides of the ball. What did you like most about what they did as far as going into a new season with a new head coach and all of those things?
You know, free agency is an interesting time, as you know, and typically free agency is about correcting mistakes you've made, right? So teams that have not been real good, have made some poor personnel decisions, maybe haven't drafted well. Now a new coach comes in. It's like, okay, we got to clean up all these errors, and salary cap goes up, so let's get aggressive. And I was really excited to see what Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles did in Chicago. I think if you reflect back a month or so ago and we all watched the Super Bowl and you watch Philadelphia dominate up front, big time offensive line, arguably the best in the league, defensive line, they rushed for the whole game and gave Patrick Mahomes fits. The game since 1892 when Pudge Heffelfinger signed the first contract, it's about linemen. It's about winning the line of scrimmage. And, Ben Johnson gets a lot of credit for, hey, all these trick plays and all of that. Those trick plays in Detroit don't work if they don't win the line of scrimmage like they did. And I think you recognize that. If you want to make a quarterback-friendly environment for Caleb Williams, draft, sign, bolster that offensive line. And they did that. 3 veteran players. They spent a lot of money, just creating an offensive line that's going to make a good environment for that quarterback and for that offense. And then the same thing on the defensive line. They got stronger there with a couple big signings as well. So I was really pleased to see they're approaching it that way. And that's what they're prioritizing first and foremost is winning the line of scrimmage, because ultimately that'll be the difference.
Yeah, and I always think back to at different times in New England, we had our kind of roster and it was set and it was keeping core guys. But like every year, the next great team that was going to challenge us, it would start in March. And Bill would always come in and tell us, you can't build a team through free agency. Well, the truth of the matter is what you just said. How do we fix or bring in a few guys who change the whole direction of what we're doing? We look at the Philadelphia Eagles last year, adding Saquon Barkley for that offense, and they had good running back play before that. DeAndre Swift had a big year, played well in the system, but it was also the person Saquon Barkley is and what he added to that locker room. And I look at Chicago, and you bring in a guy like Joe Thuney, who had the opportunity to play within New England for 5 years. He's a guy that we've already seen. He's played left tackle. He's played guard. He's played center in his career. He's all about doing whatever is best to help the team win. Like, think about how unselfish it was last year to move to being like the permanent left tackle, not filling in for a game or somebody's hurt. Just now, each week, you're going to have to line up and play a position you don't feel probably great about. And I think about Grady Jarrett, another guy. I remember we played in that Super Bowl against Atlanta. I didn't really know who he was. You looked up, he had 3 sacks in the Super Bowl, and he's continued to build and be kind of known as a locker room guy, a leader in Atlanta. So I just think about, you have all these young guys. You bring in Caleb Williams, then you draft well, and everybody's like, Chicago has all these weapons. They should be a playoff team. And you kind of forget, hey, it takes time. It's a process to become a playoff team. It's a process to be good year in and year out. And I think these guys that they've brought in, they make them better right away. Jonah Jackson, guys that have played big-time football and big-time games, they're going to be able to come in and lead. And I would guess Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles tells these veterans that come in, hey, we brought you in here for a reason. Just go be you. Don't worry about, will you fit in? Will this guy like just go be you. We need that kind of leadership here. We want some of these young guys to get in and follow you, whether it's on, tight ends or running backs. Like, we want the whole team to follow you guys, not just your position group. So I really love just not the quality of player they got, but also the quality of people they got to bring into their organization to kind of turn this around and change the overall culture.
Yeah, no doubt. And you've heard me say this a million times. As a coach, you can make the greatest speech in the world. You can have the poster, you can show them the movie, you can get this t-shirt or the sweatshirt, whatever you're putting on the hat for the year, all that about your messaging, about what your team's all about. But ultimately, who you bring in to be on your team, who you draft and who you allocate resources to in free agency or re-sign, that's you're sending that message to your team that this is what we believe in. We believe in Joe Tooney. We believe in that kind of a player. That's who we went out on day one of free agency and said, we want to bring this guy to our team. So anything else you say is secondary. It's about the team that you build. And I learned that really quickly as a head coach with the Cowboys. The first player we drafted was Tyron Smith to play left tackle. He was everything that we wanted. I could say anything, put anything on the sweatshirt, whatever, but people looked at it and said, this is what these guys believe in. They want a player like this. Doesn't say anything, works his tail off every day, the most competitive guy, the guy who wants to be great, and then everybody follows. So if you build your team with guys like that, those cornerstone players who represent what you believe, you give yourself a chance.
Yeah, and Coach, when you see these moves, what's a realistic expectation for Caleb Williams? I think right away, like I saw this week in TV, they're like, now they find out if this guy's the real deal. And I'm like, well, it's still only going to be year 2 for him. And I get he was the number 1 pick and all of that. But what would be the realistic expectations?
For me, if you go back and look at how he played, he was kind of a lightning rod player. Everybody was talking about, oh, he's great, no, he's terrible and all that. If you look at his season in total relative to rookie quarterbacks in general through the years, it's probably pretty good. Struggled early on a little bit, looked a little uncomfortable, then got going a little bit. And then, they had some issues, the coaching changed. Now there's different guys call him, he kind of battled through all that stuff and really played steady football. Was it great? No, but it was pretty good for a rookie. Now, relative to Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix, everyone's saying this guy's a bum. He's the farthest thing from a bum. He's got a chance to be a really good player. I think the environment's going to get better. You've heard me say this a million times. We talk about with Josh Allen. Josh Allen had to put the Superman cape on. He had the city of Buffalo on his shoulders for all those years. And then when we spread it out, we threw it to different guys. We were running the ball. We got the running backs more involved. We bolstered the offensive line. All of a sudden, he has an MVP year. So he goes from being a spectacular player to being a guy who's really plays at a consistently high level every week and becomes an MVP type guy. I'm not saying Caleb Williams is ready to do that next year, but when you bolster the team around you, when you're better on the offensive line, he's not running for his life. When you run the ball, when you get some weapons that you can throw the ball to that you can count on, play in and play out, all of a sudden his play will elevate. So you're always trying to create a good environment for your quarterback, and I think they've taken a lot of steps to do that. I see him continuing to progress and tapping into all that talent that he has.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that's what you have to do as a team. Like, I think right away we always kind of get infatuated with the quarterback of how do we get the quarterback? What receivers do we get? And when you build that foundation and now a guy gets an opportunity to grow, and I think that's the biggest thing that I learned from my career in the NFL of you come in, no matter how you come in, whether it's good or bad, there's going to still be a growing process that you might think you come in and, like a Jaden Daniels, come in, you have great success your rookie year. You come back for year 2, everybody is studying every single thing you did on film. Like, they're going to try to make it hell for you that next year. And I think even CJ Stroud saw some of those things of he still had a good year. He's still a really good quarterback, but it was a little different than that first year. And I think for Caleb and I think for Ben Johnson, what they're trying to build there, I think it's all about the growth of it. How can we help him grow? How can we help him get better? And they did that. It's up front. And, we forgot to even mention Odengbo, the defensive tackle that came up from the Colts. And I think that was a good sign because he's a young free agent. He's a young guy, 25 years old, showed great flashes of playing good interior football inside. So I think that's what they're saying. Hey, we don't want you to do everything, Caleb. Like, we want you to have a start, and now we're going to build a team. And then, moving forward to another rookie quarterback in Drake May, who eventually got his time to shine in New England. All the talk, right since the last game ended, we were in Detroit and we watched the whole thing go down as we're watching the 1:00 games, and Joe Milton gets to start for New England. And then, I think it was 90 minutes after the game, they decide they're going to move on and they fired Gerard Mayo. And I think ever since then, it's just been, what is New England going to do? What are they going to do? You hire Mike Vrabel, and you just said it. The thing you have to show your team is, what direction do we want to move in? And the Patriots said, we want to be really good on defense. We know everybody's talking about our offense. What receivers are we going to get? What left tackle are we going to go get? They said, we're going to get the guys that we're aiming for. We're going to aim for some guys, offense and defense, but we're not going to sit there and cry over the guys we don't miss. Reportedly, they tried to go after Ronnie Stanley. He signed back. They said, that's not going to hold us back. Carlton Davis, Milton Williams, Harold Landry, Robert Spillane, they went all out and they upgraded the defense. And the thing that stuck out to me of, being in all of the New England circles and following a lot of the media people up there is, this team lacks a lot of different positions. So, yeah, are there some positions that stick out more than others, especially on the offensive side because they've been bad on offense for a few years now? Yes, but overall, when you have to upgrade, you try to get the best available players. You try to also get culture guys. You get a Milton Williams who's just coming off a Super Bowl, a Robert Spillane who's known as a guy that'll run downhill and hit you in the mouth. And all of these guys have some connection back to guys on the staff. So it does feel like they said, you know what, we want to get the best players. We also want to make sure we get players we know and we have an expectation for what they're going to bring to this New England Patriots team.
Yeah, no doubt. I thought that was really well said. And if you think about it, Ben Johnson, the first 3 guys that he signed were offensive linemen. Vrabel, the first 14 guys they signed were defensive guys. So it was a little bit reminiscent of your days in New England. It seemed like every year in the first round, New England would take, a defensive player who was going to be a great player for 10 years. And they said, all right, Brady, you figure it out on the other side. And, and it seemed like a good formula. So I think Vrabel learned well. I do think they are going to have to help support Drake May and from a personnel standpoint. And the thing you always have to do is you have to pull back on free agency and the draft, and you have to look at them together. And I think a lot of people fail to do that. Okay, so how season ends, how are we going to acquire players? What's the resources? Well, re-sign our own guys, and then you have free agency, and then you have the draft. And we always used to joke that, boy, wouldn't it be great if the draft were first and then free agency? Because then you figure out really what you need. So you have to kind of do these preemptive strikes. And I think you have to look at the whole landscape. You have to look at it all together and say, okay, we got these 6 months to get guys. Who are re-signing? Who are the cornerstone players that we need, or the role players that we need from our own team? And then you say, okay, how does free agency look relative to the draft? It's heavy on defensive linemen in the draft. Maybe we can get one there. We don't have to go crazy. Or, hey, it's light on defensive linemen. We have holes. We got to go get Milton Williams. He's one of those type of guys. So I think if you look at it through that landscape, through that lens, and see the entire landscape, you have a better chance of building your team the right way by the time you strap it up in training camp. And I think that's probably what they're doing. They went heavy on defense. They wanted veteran guys. They targeted guys they knew that they felt like they could get. They had some money to go get them. And now you pull back and you say, okay, what else? Who are the other little free agents that we can add to our offense and put them in certain roles? And then who can we draft to kind of grow with Drake May on that side of the ball? Because that's what they have to do. But there's no doubt that Vrabel made a statement from the outset that we're going to get better on defense. Defense wins championships. This is how you're going to have to this is how we're going to have to build it. And we're going to use some resources. We're going to go get some guys. One thing you got to remember, the first couple of days of free agency, you're paying retail. You're paying retail plus, right? I mean, Milton Williams was a pass rusher for Philly. He didn't play on early downs, right? Now, he had a couple sacks in the Super Bowl and really flashed, and I think it's a heck of a signing for them, but I think they're paying him $26 million a year. So that's a lot of money for that. But hey, we're a team that has these needs. We have some money. Let's go do it. As long as he's the kind of guy that represents what we want, and he appears to be that way. But make no mistake about it, Vrabel wants to get that defense right.
Yeah, and that's what stuck out to me. Like Milton Williams became the highest paid player ever in New England Patriot history. When you say those things, and that's no disrespect to him, but it is true. And right when these signings happen, people right away are like, "Is that a good signing?" Like I saw people debating Carlton Davis, like, "Is this a good signing?" It's like the truth of the matter is, no matter what the payment for the guy is, if he executes and he helps your team, and it's a good signing. Like there's a plan when you do this. So you want all these things that happen. You have to pay the number depending on how much you want that guy, what the market tells you. So like you said, all the reports came out that Milton Williams was headed to Carolina. Seemed like New England said the only way to get him is we have to go to this number. So, and I think the thing that sticks out for New England is they're probably not done. Mike Vrabel said before free agency opened up, their goal was to address their needs in free agency so that hopefully they can go into the draft and just get the best available players. And when you look, you just said it, there's some guys who they might be interested in who still haven't signed, or they're going to get released at the start of the new league year that'll come up in a few hours on Wednesday at 4:00. So you look at these different things and I'm like, well, if they go get a receiver, if they go get a left tackle, or maybe another offensive lineman, maybe they do exactly what Vrabel said. And it's almost like what a difference a year makes of they had all this money last year and they didn't go crazy and spend it in free agency. And now they realize like, hey, to be competitive in this league, we got to kind of change the direction. And I think overall, like you said, being in New England for all those years, it just felt like Bill said defense will be the main thing we hang our hat on because we can find guys on offense. And I think the one offensive guy they did sign so far was Mac Hollins, was a guy that we all loved, I think, from a media standpoint, because you paid attention to his entrance into the game all the time. But I think that was another message to the team of, hey, we're going to get a guy. He's going to play all four downs on offense. He'll be in there a little bit to block in the run game. He's going to catch some passes. Had his best year in Vegas with Josh McDaniels as the coordinator and head coach. But we're going to use this guy in every way possible. And I think it's one position from a wide receiver standpoint. They have a new guy that can be a leader. Is he going to be your star player on offense? Probably not. But I think for those guys in that receiver room, he's going to be a guy that I think they're going to have to look at and say, okay, how do we become pros? How do we get better year after year, day after day? And a guy like Mac Hollins, not a big name, but I'm sure some of those young players are going to see his work ethic and be like, oh, wow. Like he's working that hard just to, be a special teams player and maybe a 3 or 4 wide receiver. We're not doing nearly enough if we think we're these type of guys to be the guy. So I think that was a kind of character building offensive signing that'll help them out throughout the year.
Yeah, no doubt. Again, it's another message. You said it. Core special teams player. He's going to block in the run game. This is what we value. The one tricky thing, though, and you've heard me say this before, the Tom Brady factor is real in New England. And so you have to be careful of copying what New England did for all those years because they had the ultimate eraser. We've talked about that before, you and I. Sometimes
I use it all the time when I tell people, I'm like, Jason Garrett said, the ultimate eraser.
Yeah, it's true. Like, we used to, DeMarcus Ware would make a sack. And we'd be, we're playing great defense. And I'm like, we might not be playing great defense. He just might beat 3 guys to sack the quarterback. So sometimes you have to look kind of below that top level, right? Nick Saban talks about the process, right? Not the result. Sometimes the result can distort the evaluation. And when you have one of those guys that erases all the issues, and I think New England felt that when Tom left, and then, Mac Jones goes in there and, he's the 15th pick of the draft and he's just trying to be, a quarterback in this league. And the drop off was so substantial that all those things that Brady erased, Mac Jones is just trying to, go through his progressions and throw it to the right guy. I mean, he can't do those things. So I do think Drake May is going to need help. He's shown a lot of really good signs of being someone who can be their quarterback for a long time. But I think you have to be careful about saying it's all about the defense and this is how we did it back then. I do think they need to bolster it. And they recognize that. And I think Vrabel's comments about addressing the needs in free agency so you can draft purely, I think that's a really important thing. And that was always a goal of ours. You never want to be sitting and looking at that draft board saying, we need a left tackle. All of a sudden, you're pushing the left tackles way up the board ahead of players that are better than them at other positions. So if you can solidify it as best you can going into the draft and then take the best players, that's the best way to build the team.
Yeah, I'll never forget last year when you said, and we were talking about the quarterbacks coming out, and you said the thing when you evaluate, quarterbacks, but really all positions are, is this guy this type of player, number 2, number 3 pick a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? Like, we always have to think about that because, like you just said, if you start moving up this positional need and now you take this guy at 4 overall, when realistically you're like, man, a year ago, this guy would have been a second-round pick, but we really need him because then what ends up happening is in 2 or 3 years, you need that position again because you drafted a guy that wasn't going to be good at that position overall. He just was the best available at the position in the draft. And when you said that to me, I started to think back to all of these different guys, not just when I was on the Patriots, but on any team that would end up getting drafted. And then in 2 years or 3 years, you're playing against that guy and they're on their second team, they're a backup and they get in the game and you're like, damn, wasn't that the guy that was like the number 2 pick or 3 pick? Because that's what happens so fast. So it's an important factor.
Especially in this day and age that we live in, because all these other outlets like create the draft before it happens. This is the best quarterback. This is the best this is the order of these guys. And if you don't watch it, if you're in a decision-making mode, you can subconsciously listen to this and you're not doing the evaluations yourself. And I'm all for mock drafts and all of that, but you have to put that stuff aside. You're almost looking at mock drafts to see what how other people might perceive a player more than how you perceive them. And to that point, if you go down to my garage right now, I mean, I have the draft binders going back for the last 20 years of evaluations. And every so often you go back and you say, okay, what did I really think of this guy? Yeah. What do I think of this guy compared to this guy? If they were in the draft together, what happened to this guy in the NFL, right? We thought he was great, but then he was kind of an okay player. Would we have thought this guy was better or worse than him? And so I think if you keep thinking about that, the spectrum of players, not only this year, but through the years. And, you made the comment, you're drafting the guy a couple of years later. I can remember when we first got married, we're thinking about buying this couch, and this couch cost whatever, I'll say $100. This one costs $200. Let's get the cheaper one. Well, you realize when you buy the cheaper one, about 6 months later, you're buying another couch, So sometimes it's better to buy the more expensive one right from the start. Oh, we're really going to draft this guy this high? Yes, because he's a really good player, and you're not going to remember that you picked him with the 9th pick of the draft or the 12th pick of the draft. Yeah. You're not going to remember. You're just going to remember he's a really good player.
Yeah, I'll never tell my wife that kind of way of thinking, though, because she always wants to buy the more expensive thing anyway. Right. But look, thinking about Milton Williams becomes the highest paid guy in New England, but he left. He left the Philadelphia Eagles. He leaves that team that, every year everybody talks about how do the Super Bowl teams recover, because usually when you win a Super Bowl, you lose a lot of free agents because you said it. Milton Williams had a big Super Bowl. Josh Sweat had a big Super Bowl game. So both those guys leave to New England and Arizona, respectively. But then they trade C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and then they also lose Isaiah Rodgers, who wasn't a starter, but at different times when guys got banged up, he was able to fill in. And when you think about Mitchell or Slay not being out there, he was a guy that, when he played for the Colts, he became a reliable corner. How do you feel about when you look at these teams and, you were a Cowboys coach so in this division, but when they win a Super Bowl, how do you just turn it on fast and say, okay, these are the core guys we're keeping. This is the direction we're going. Don't worry about the guys we lose. Let's just focus on what we have and what we need to go get.
Well, I'm really dating myself, Dev, because when I was playing with the Cowboys in the 90s and we're winning Super Bowls, that's when free agency started. And that's when the salary cap started. So we had this amazing team, 1992. I mean, this young team that was just remarkably good. You talk about offensive line, defensive line, skill. I mean, it was ridiculous. And, I think 6 of them are in the Hall of Fame, a few of them first ballot Hall of Famers, and just an amazing, amazing team. But we win the next year, and then free agency kicks in. And all of a sudden teams, hey, we'll take Alvin Harper. We'll take this guy. We'll take this guy. Like all of a sudden the team becomes a little bit decimated. And it's not unlike NIL these days in college. All of a sudden that Alabama roster is not quite as deep as it was when Nick Saban was there, And so these championship teams, when you feel like you're set up forever, once you win those championships, everyone's studying you and everybody wants your guys. And so we lived it. And all of a sudden we became a thinner team, and you had to make these decisions. Of course, we're going to keep Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith and Michael Irvin and those guys, and you have to pay them accordingly, but you're going to lose backup defensive linemen, starting defensive linemen, that linebacker, we can't pay him. And that's what's happened through the years. And, Philadelphia is going through it. Everyone looks at that team. They watch that game. Kansas City was 15-2 in the regular season, and they didn't play their starters in the last game, right? And we talked about this all year long. Oh, they're just winning by this, and it's the skin of their teeth. It's hard to win 15 games in the NFL, right? And they're a really good team, and Philly destroyed them. Philly destroyed them the whole game. At some point in that game, it was 13 first downs to 1, right? 288 yards to 30. I mean, they destroyed them, and everyone's like, what the heck is Philly doing? We need those guys. And it didn't surprise me one bit that they'd go pluck them. I have a tremendous amount of faith in Howie Roseman, how he built the team the last few years, the decisions he made, they just kept being right. There's this thing, Jeff Bezos, there's 14 leadership traits at Amazon. You should go look this up. It's really good. One of them is great leaders are right a lot. And it's
simple
true.
Thing, but true.
Yeah. I mean, it's a simple thing. And you can think about the process we have for the draft. And boy, we know how to evaluate. We have great meetings. We have great discussions. The fact is, at the end of it, you have to pick a guy. You have to pick a guy. You have this guy or this guy. Who you taking? Boom. With pick 199 in 2000, New England took Tom Brady. You don't think that was a big decision?
Yeah.
Right? It was a huge decision. We picked Dak Prescott in the 4th round when I was in Dallas. Boom. Wow. Transformational decision. There were 15 other guys we were talking about. We chose him. So when you look at Philadelphia, it's like Howie has been right a lot, right? Jordan Mailata in the 7th round. Now he's one of the best left tackles. Let's go get Becton from the Jets. He's a throwaway. I mean, on and on and on. Landon Dickerson. Oh, let's go get Saquon Barkley. We have Carson Wentz, but let's go get Jalen Hurts. I mean, A.J. Brown. I mean, look at how they built the team, let alone Jalen Carter and all the other guys they have on defense. So they've been right a lot. And that's not to say they're going to be right every time going forward, but they know their team. They know who they ultimately can pay. Those two guys, Sweat and Milton Williams, they let them out of the building because they probably couldn't pay them relative to the other guys, and they're trusting on their ability to be right again. And hopefully they're able to do that because they got a really, really good team.
Yeah, and it's funny too because teams are looking at all of the coverage of the Super Bowl, and all of 2 weeks it was this team's so talented. This team's good at every position. And when free agency opens, you would be crazy not to call Philadelphia and say, hey, is there a guy, Gardner Johnson? Is there a guy? Hey, what are you guys thinking about him? All right, what are you going to do? We'll take him. And I think for Philly, they're like, okay, we'll give you Gardner Johnson because we just realized how good Cooper DeJean is. We love Reed Blankenship. Oh, but Mekhi Becton's probably going to leave, a guy we brought in as a tackle and then moved him to guard. Oh, we'll take one of your draft picks from a year ago that's a guard, and we'll bring him in because when I sat down with Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata, what they raved about was their offensive line coach. They said he was the difference. A year before when I went and talked to Jason Kelsey, he raved about the same coach. So I think they say Howie Roseman knows, hey, we believe we have the best offensive line coach in football. We'll get guys in. he'll make them better. That'll continue our dominance of where we feel like is the most important up front. And then I think the other aspect of that is realizing who are the leaders on the team, who are the guys that are not just good players, but when they're on the field, our whole unit becomes better. And I think about my time in New England, every year was all like we always lost key guys that were top contributors to why we won football games. I think about 2014, we won the Super Bowl the first time in 10 years, bringing in Darrelle Revis and Brandon Browner. Both leave that year in free agency. And I'm like, damn, we just brought them in. Like, this seemed like a good thing. But it was the realization for them was like, okay, we kind of figured that was only going to be for a year. And it did exactly what we wanted to do. It brought us a Super Bowl. We're already thinking about our next moves. We already found Malcolm Butler out and he could be our starter. Logan Ryan's been waiting. He's learned from these guys. So I think Philadelphia and High Rose are better than anybody. They plan ahead, right? We always talk about how they pay their players early. Like, they're thinking of what the next move is. Bringing Zach Bond back. You bring him in as a free agent. He's a special teams player in New Orleans. He becomes a star for you. I think he makes other guys around him better. And I think they realize that. And it's the hardest thing. I think I used to always sit there as a player and be like, man, I would hate to make these decisions. Like, I would hate to sit there a year when we had Jamie Collins, Dante Hightower, and Chandler Jones all within 2 years. They were going to be free agents and needed to get paid. And I'm like, how do you choose which of these three guys or two or three? Like, how do you decide? And that's so hard. But just realizing which players you think will be the leaders and the guys that improve the whole team has to be a big factor in that decision.
No doubt. And I'm looking at a guy right now who was one of those cornerstone players. And I think as an organization, you have to identify who are the cornerstone players, who are the guys that represent absolutely everything we want as a person, as a player. They're great examples, and they're really, really productive players. And you prioritize those. And when you're on teams like you were on in New England, there's a lot of them. So sometimes it's hard to distinguish between the guys. I think the other thing is the ability to replace a guy at a reasonable cost that can fit into the whole overall plan for your salary cap. And sometimes it's like, this guy's going to break through the ceiling and we can get another guy who's probably not as good. We might come back down a little bit, but the difference might be marginal relative to the cost that we're going to have to pay. And so that's why you have those hold the fort guys that you guys had. And I think that was probably one of Bill's great traits up there in New England, was building the team. Here are my cornerstone guys. These are the guys that are with us, and they've been with us for 10 years, and they're our guys. But then we at the right value, we add these role players, maybe a superstar player for a year or a role player. And then we let these two guys go. I think manipulating all of that around those cornerstone guys, I think he was masterful at that. And I think that's what the best teams are able to do. Right now, Howie Roseman is the guy who's doing that as well as anybody in the league.
He definitely is. Let's move on to a little quarterback musical chairs. We'll do a word association of right here. The Raiders trade with Seattle and they get Geno Smith. First word or thought that came to your mind when the Raiders got Geno Smith?
Yeah, reunion. Just getting back with Pete Carroll and how Pete knows him and really likes him, and he played great football for him. And you talked about that earlier about just the comfort level with guys. The guys who were going up to New England, everybody had a connection. Well, it's nice when your head coach and the quarterback have a connection, and sometimes that can trump other things. Maybe there's another guy that's potentially available. You say, hey, I know what I'm going to have here. I know what this guy's all about. I know we can win with him. So I think that was a big part of that decision.
Yeah, I say some hope. I think for the Raiders, no matter what moves you made, I think it was going to be tough until they got a quarterback in there that guys on the team felt like, hey, we can win some games with this guy. And I think Geno brings a little hope to Vegas. Obviously bringing back Max Crosby and all those different things. But that quarterback position, when there's a guy there, and we always talk about it, it just changes the path of the whole team. Everybody is a little bit more excited. You work a little harder because when we play against, especially in that division, some of these teams, we're going to need to be good across the board. And I think Geno Smith brings a little bit of that hope. And then Geno leaves Seattle, and it kind of sets up for Sam Darnold coming in. For me, the word was there's a question mark for me. I think Sam Darnold had an awesome year, and I think he did a great job of understanding, hey, I'm going to go somewhere that's going to be best for me. The question mark for me in Seattle is you have this trio of receivers with Lockett, Metcalf, and with Jackson Smith and Jigba. You lose Lockett and you lose Metcalf. You struggled a little bit on the offensive line, so you struggled to run the ball, even though you had two good running backs. Now, Sam Darnold, you look up and you're like, hey, the offensive line's not as good as it was a year ago. The weapons won't be as good a year ago. I'm just hoping, and I think John Snyder's done an awesome job through his time as general manager in Seattle. The question mark for me is what's next? Where do they go to build out the rest of this team to make it good for Sam Darnold?
Yeah, I agree with you on every front there. To me, and we started talking about this at the end of the year, there was this idea that Sam was going to come in and he was, maybe hold the fort for a year. And then it's JJ McCarthy's team, 10th pick of the draft. We got all that. And then you look at how well Sam played all year long. To me, there was a real question mark about whether or not they should keep him in Minnesota. And I know he didn't play well the last couple games, but I would argue that they didn't play well.
Yeah.
And I would argue that Kevin O'Connell, as great a job as he does, arguably those were his two worst games for me. They got real drop back happy. They were dropping back and dropping back and dropping back, and they weren't blocking anybody. The Rams thing, I don't know what it ended up being, 9 or 10 sacks in the game. Yeah. And, Sam can't run the ball, balance it out, have your offensive lineman come off the ball and hit them in the mouth. And so I bring that up to say this: Sam played really, really well in Minnesota at a really high level. And to me, that was a good fit there. And I think the last couple games really, put a sour taste in people's mouths. And maybe they forgot about how well he had played up to that point. And so when he goes to Seattle, the point that you make is the right one. They better make sure that they bolster the offensive line. They better make sure they run the ball, because Sam Darnold or any other quarterback in the NFL, they're not going to play well if they got to do it by themselves. They're not going to play well if they drop back 50 times. They're not. And the emphasis in Dallas right now is we got to run the ball, right? For the same reasons. Take some pressure off the quarterback. We saw it in Buffalo. And so the teams that are best able to do that and construct their team accordingly, they're the ones that give their quarterback and their team a chance. So I hope they make the corresponding moves in Seattle, because I think Sam can play in the right environment.
I agree with you. And the last, the Jets, they signed Justin Fields, reunites him back with Garrett Wilson out here in New Jersey. And what do you think about that one?
It was interesting to me. The other part to this decision is what's next. Is Justin Fields your quarterback? Is the next decision you make a backup quarterback? Or are you going to draft one of these quarterbacks high? If not the first couple quarterbacks high in the draft, you're going to take one in the second round or the third round. Is Justin Fields a bridge to the future, or is your quarterback? You paid him a lot of money, you guaranteed him a lot of money, but you didn't break the bank for him, right? To say you're our starter for the next 10 years. So to me, that's the question. I really like Justin Fields, and I think he got better and better and better in his time in Chicago. And then when he played in Pittsburgh, he did some good things. The question for me on him has been and will be, is he someone who processes the game really well? There's no doubt he can make spectacular plays with his feet and with his arm. He made some big time throws, but can he consistently, in a drop back passing game at the NFL level, make the decisions, make the throws, make the decisions, make the throws? We haven't really seen that yet. So that'll be an interesting question. Again, when he goes there, I think he solidifies them, he stabilizes them. But what's the competition? Is he their guy? Is he going to be supported like their guy? Are they going to make it all about him? Are they going to bring someone else in to compete with him? I think that's the story for me.
Yeah, that last phrase you said, like that, to me, it was stability. For Aaron Glenn coming in, new head coach, you're obviously a defensive guy. You got a plan there on defense. You got some guys that were already there. Justin Fields now gives you something that at least you can say, we can run an NFL offense. We can get going and try to have some type of attack and plan. And I think the thing that sticks out for me the most is what rushing attack are they going to have now with Breece Hall and Braylon Davis, and now with Justin Fields. You can do so many different things. But again, I think you hit it right on the head of what does this look like competition-wise next year, 2 years from now? Like, is this a true investment in Justin Fields, or is he just that guy that comes in and kind of gives you some stability as you build towards the future? Maybe having him there makes you not have to trade up and go crazy to get one of these guys if you're not in love with them, and kick it down the road till next year, and maybe something happens where you feel like, okay, now we can get the quarterback we want. I guess that's yet to be seen, but
you don't want to buy the couch twice.
Exactly. Don't buy it twice. That'll be our new thing. Anytime this year, as we're watching somebody and they're like, they bought the cheaper couch and this is what they got.
It's true. It's true.
And then lastly, the last topic we'll hit on, Myles Garrett gets paid, and you look up and, Myles Garrett, everything came out, probably wouldn't play in Cleveland again, demanded a trade. Jimmy Haslam refused to meet with him. Was this all to get a new contract or not? Yet to be seen. But to me, it was what it means for the rest of the league. Like, we've heard Cincinnati, they said they plan on making Jamar Chase the highest paid non-quarterback. The Dallas Cowboys with Micah Parsons, he's sitting there and he's been very patient. And I'm not sitting out. I'm going to play. My goal is to be a Dallas Cowboy. He's probably the one guy on defense that if he got paid more than Myles Garrett, we would all sit there and be like, yeah, like he's up. So I would expect him to take that higher than Myles Garrett. I'm sitting here for other teams, and I'm like, if I'm Cincinnati and I'm the Cowboys, like, what are we waiting for? Like, why are we sitting here? Do we think it's going to get cheaper? Like, what is the plan here? Because now Myles Garrett has upped this thing to $40 million a year for a defensive player, and it's not going to get any cheaper. And I'm looking at Jamar Chase. What happens with T. Higgins? What happens here might be the difference of if I'm willing to say, hey, I'll take a little bit less. Hey, this makes sense. Of not just being like, nope, I want 43. I want to shoot this thing out of the water. So I just don't understand why teams are waiting when you get some of these guys who, when you look up, you're just like, I want him a part of my franchise any day of the week. Let's just get this thing done with and move on.
Yeah, it's like real estate, right? Can you believe that oceanfront property? No way we're going to do, and then you dive in and you realize the next year it's that much more expensive. The next year it's that much more expensive. It's that much more expensive. So when you have a guy like this is oceanfront property. This is wherever you pick the spot. And Myles Garrett, I'm just so pleased Cleveland did not let him out of the building, right? When you got a guy like this, you keep him. You make him a Cleveland Brown for life. And there's a lot of other decisions you're going to make about the team needs right now, but this is the kind of guy that you'll keep for 12 years, for 14 years, right? And so solidify that. You talk about a cornerstone player, a cornerstone person. This is the guy that you want on your team. So I'm glad they did what they did, but I agree wholeheartedly with your point. The more you wait, the more expensive it becomes. It's really as simple as that. And whether it's oceanfront property or players in the NFL, it's just the way it is. It's the way our society works. And it's certainly the way the NFL works. So you want to be preemptive on all of these things as much as you can. Identify your guy. Is this a guy that we want for the next decade? Identify him. Sew him up. When Mahomes signed that contract, whenever it was 4 or 5 years ago now, well, I don't know what it's
like
maybe
10 years
it ended up being $500 million or whatever that was. Everyone thought it was the craziest thing ever. Now he's a bargain relative to the other quarterbacks around the league, right? And we were talking about the other day, this is way, way before your time, but Magic Johnson signed a 25-year contract for $25 million. And I was like, oh my God,
what are they doing? Jerry Buss is crazy.
Now, trust me, that's whatever, 40 years ago now. But I mean, it's comical. and then the next guy and the next guy and the next guy. So if you got one of these guys, sign them up for as long as you can, because it's going to be a bargain in the end.
It's so true. And it reminds me of my mom telling me when I was thinking about getting engaged to my wife, and she was like, hey, the longer you wait, your wife's just going to expect that ring to be bigger and bigger and bigger. Go ahead, get engaged and get married. And it seems like for some of these teams, they're just waiting for another girl to walk down and surprise them, but it's not happening. And I think what we see is it leaks over into your fan base and everyone's upset, and then your roster's not as good, because I think for the Cowboys and Bengals, there's other holes you still need to fix before you go out and you give these guys an enormous amount of money. So just give it to them and then move on. But again, that's what's fun about the offseason. That's what's fun about free agency. And then soon we'll have the draft coming up in about a month and a half. That's just how everything works. But appreciate you sitting down, JG. It's always fun to catch up in the offseason. Football Night in America podcast. We'll be back at some point in the offseason doing more of these, man. See you guys soon.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.